Um, so I'm Bruce, founder of Movement for Livable London, which was set up to promote debates about how changing the way that we move goods and people around our city can create a better city for everyone. And again, just to echo John's point, when we're talking about livability and the role of transport in livability, it is about both creating livable streets and livable environments, but also how transport can facilitate and deal with some of the other livability challenges that London faces, particularly around housing. I'm also a trustee of Living Streets, as is John. And Living Streets, for those of you who don't know, is the national charity that champions the rights of pedestrians and walkers. So I wanted to talk about walking and putting walking at the heart of a vision for a more livable London. And walking really is a kind of, I suppose, a shorthand for all those things that we need to do, some of the things that John picked up on about creating a great city. If we solve our transport issues and address the challenges we need to address, we will create a great city for walking. It will also be a great city for riding bikes in. It will have great public transport. It will have fewer cars. It will have fewer lorries. It will probably have fewer taxis as well. But just to start again, you know, a reminder that it's not all doom and gloom, and I think that it is a question of moving London's transport and London as a city from being a good city to a great city. And there's loads of talk about this, there's loads of reports, there's lots of good projects happening, but I think what's missing at the moment is a kind of coherent vision and strategy for how we transform London's transport system and think in a complete way about how its streets function to create a better city for everyone. And we need to do that urgently, because there's a whole host of social, economic and environmental challenges that we're facing now, new challenges that will arise in the future, and how we deal with those and make sure that London flourishes in the future and continues to be and becomes an even better city for living in is really important. So, good positive trends, some good foundations to build on, one of the world's best public transport networks for a start. But we need to make an urgent transition to a post-car and post-oil transport system. And that takes time, but we really, really need to pick up the pace because we can't afford to delay on these issues. And so when you think about, great cities, great city life, and the reason why cities exist, they exist to bring people together. People come together on the city streets, and they do that when they're walking around. And so, as Jan Gale here, a Danish urbanist, one of the kind of great current thinkers on cities and how they work, says walking is the beginning, the starting point, the prerequisite for city life is good walking opportunities. I didn't just put that in for you, Vincent. That is the narrow way in Hackney, which I think is a great example of the kind of projects we need, not just because it's transformed the street into a much better environment for people, but also was done through a pilot project as a way of testing it and making sure it works and getting people on board. More on that in a second. And I think Living Streets and other pedestrian campaigners have a challenge on their hands. You know, everybody walks, but nobody cares about it. It's really difficult to motivate people to campaign for better pedestrian environments. We put up with all manner of nonsense and crap as pedestrians. We're incredibly resilient. We don't do it so much as cyclists, and it's great that cycling has now found a political voice in London. I think there's a challenge for cycle campaigners to become more advocates for a livable city and argue for other issues and around wider changes for a better city overall. But as this quote from Nick Cohen writing in The Observer a couple of weeks ago, there is no kind of powerful lobby. So there's organisations, but in terms of this kind of wider groundswell for walking and pedestrian issues, it's not there. And so you get things like Blackfriars, that picture at the bottom, loads of money spent on improving a junction, no consideration really for how people get across it, and people literally putting their lives in danger every day because people follow desire lines. They don't like to go underground to cross streets and everything else. So the mayor, I think, needs to be this champion for walking and needs to speak up for this silent minority, which is actually everybody. So by championing walking, you're actually working to improve London for everybody. And so just a few of the things that a future mayor, Christian or otherwise, might do to do that. So crucially, I think, is this issue around reducing traffic and road danger reduction. And actually, so road danger is this idea that rather than just kind of trying to make roads safe by, say, segregating pedestrians from motor vehicles by putting guardrails up everywhere and forcing everyone to use pedestrian crossings, you actually make the environment much safer by reducing the amount of traffic on the city streets and slowing down the speeds that it moves at. And I think, as John said as well, more congestion charging, greater use of and speeding up the introduction of ultra-low emission zones and everything else is crucial to delivering that. And again, just this reminder that that traffic in London isn't just private cars, and actually, certainly in inner London, this isn't really a question about. Car ownership is falling. 60% of households in inner London don't own cars. This is one of those positive trends that I was talking about before. London is going to move quite quickly, I think, towards. Certainly in inner London, towards being a place where private car ownership is a rarity, and things like car sharing, car clubs and everything else become much more common. How we deal with freight and everything else is a big issue, and again, there's taxis. But I think the key issue here is to remember that the reason why all these lorries and vans and taxis and everything else come into the city is they are there to serve the city, not the other way around. And so it's not about banning people from driving into central London or anything else. It's about redefining the relationship that traffic has with the streets and rebalancing our streets to make them much more places for people than places for traffic. And so this comes back to this. John had one with much better pictures in. I've got to find a better one, John. This matrix in the Rose Task Force report, how we reorientate and shift what happens on London streets to make them much more places for people to be in, places for social activities, places where people just want to be and spend their time, rather than roads that are there primarily to move traffic. And there's a big challenge here, and again, it's interesting that one of the things that Boris and Andrew Gilligan will always kind of say when they're talking about changing London to make it better for cyclists, the mayor only controls 5% of the roads. And they're the most difficult roads or streets to crack. That's the Transport for London road network is a strategic road network. It carries the most traffic. It has a vital job to do, continuing moving traffic. But, it also runs through a lot of places. So this is Holloway Road, as some of you might recognise, and this is a high street. And so whilst it needs to remain open to traffic, it clearly needs a lot of work done to it to make it a much more attractive environment and to try and reduce the dominance of traffic on the streets. If you look at kind of, TfL do these surveys of what people think about public transport and the Transport for London road network. And it's interesting that between 2009 and 2013, people's perception of the urban realm, so the quality of those places, hasn't changed. It's kind of muddling along there at about 63 to 65%. They've classed it here as slow improvement. I'm not sure whether I really class that as improvement. But people aren't massively impressed with the environments they're having to deal with. But it's not easy to change streets, and this is, I think, why we really need the mayor to take a role in leading things, and everybody who uses those streets, they think whatever they're doing there is the most crucial thing on it, and so we really need kind of leadership on this, but we also need to help people reimagine how streets could be, which is, I think, this importance of kind of pilot projects, temporary interventions to help people reimagine what streets could be like. So on the left is a project called Pocket Places, Peckham, run by Sustrans, going on at the moment, which, it's temporary changes, cosmetic changes to street environments and other public spaces to just kind of get people thinking differently about what those places could be like and build support for wider, more permanent change in the future. The pictures on the right, both from the States, the one at the top is something called a parklet, something we don't really do in this country, but I think we should do much more of, which is where you take a parking space out, might only be for the summer, and turn it back into a public space. And just kind of helping people reimagine and think differently about what those streets could be like. And then the bottom is New York, which is perhaps one of the most famous examples of a city that's used what they call the paint and planters technique, also includes boulders, where quick pilot projects to think differently, help map out how the street could be used differently, and then, if people like it, if it works, come back 3 months later and make it permanent, as is happening now. And then just to finish off, I think another thing from New York, but actually a lot of US cities and cities around the world now do things like summer streets, cyclovias, open street events. And we kind of have versions of this in London. So, Regent Street's going to be shut to traffic every Sunday in July. But actually, Summer Streets in New York is a much bigger event than that. It closes down miles of streets and just turns them over to people for a day. And these are different from Skyride or whatever it's called nowadays. They're not just about a single mode of transport. It's not just about cycling. You see there, it's like playing, running, walking, cycling. It's about just celebrating and enjoying city life and making people realise that if our streets were run and managed and designed in a different way, then we'd all enjoy ourselves a lot more. So just to finish up on this point that kind of John touched on and is a key thing, and I mentioned at the start, is this point about vision and strategy and what I think the role of the Mayor of London should be. So 2 mayors, well, an ex-mayor and a current mayor there. One of those mayors set out a very clear vision for how he wanted his city to be in the future, how he wanted its streets to work, changed kilometres, hundreds of kilometres of those streets, made them better places for people, put in, loads of new cycle infrastructure and everything else. And the other one is Boris Johnson. So, kind of steely eyes of determination from Bloomberg there. And so, this is what we need. We need a mayor who will take a lead on.
I'm working on that.
who will take a lead on these issues. Who will fight some hard battles, undoubtedly, just as Bloomberg and his Transport Commissioner Janet Sadiq Khan had to do in New York. And who will communicate how, by doing these things, will create a better London for everybody and a much better place to walk as a result. And that is it. Thank you very much.